Hey guys, welcome back to John's Fantasy Football Show. I'm John. Thank you guys for being here. I'm super excited for this podcast, and I know I didn't have one last week, so I hope you guys enjoyed your Thanksgiving. I enjoyed my Thanksgiving with my family, but hopefully you guys saw the podcast I posted 2 weeks ago. If you didn't, that's the one podcast that if you're going to watch any of them all season, that's the one you should watch. It's a playoff special, fantasy football playoff special. I tell you everything. Literally, I sit down with Jared. Jared comes onto the screen, and we talk for an hour about the players I like and I don't like for the fantasy football playoffs. So if you didn't check that video out, definitely go over there. And I do want to mention, now that it's December, it's time. If you guys want to join the Patreon and get my fantasy advice so I can message you back and look at your teams, you could send me screenshots on Instagram. I can message you throughout the Patreon, and I could help you set your lineup, improve your team, and make sure that you win your fantasy football championship or that you don't get last place and don't have to do your league's punishment. But I'm excited for this podcast because I am going to talk about games that I love and games that I hate. We are entering week 13. There's a bunch of good games this week, and I think there's going to be a lot of high-scoring matchups and a lot to take into consideration because of there's a lot of injuries and good and different matchups for this week. So I'm going to start off with the games I love. There's 4 games I love. I'll start first with the Jaguars versus Lions. I think Lions coming off a 10-day rest. I think they're going to have a good game. I think offensively, the Lions have been great recently. They even scored a lot of points against the Bills. So I think that's going to be a game where both teams score over 20 points, probably score at least 2 touchdowns each. And ETN is back. You got to get him into your lineup. Christian Kirk still get into your lineup. Zay Jones, a streaming option after over 25 fantasy points last week. Trevor Lawrence, a good streaming option as well. I mean, Jamal Williams, he's a decent RB2 option. Swift, I actually like a little bit more than Jamal Williams this week. Swift might be a weekly pick this week. Who knows? Stay tuned for my live tomorrow to see that. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, definitely get him into your lineup. And one thing I want to say about these games that I love and games that I hate, the reason I'm doing this segment is because this is what you want to do when you're deciding which players you should start, because you guys are probably deciding between some WR2s, some RB2s, or a flex guy, and you're like, which guy should I choose? Well, usually you want to choose the players that you think are going to have to throw the ball a lot. Players on teams where you think they're going to be trailing and they're going to have to throw the ball a lot. So I think the Jags-Lions is going to be high scoring, and I think both teams are going to throw the ball. I mean, both teams should have to run the ball too, but this next game, the Jets-Vikings, I think that's a game where both teams are going to throw the ball a decent amount. I know Sauce Gardner's on Justin Jefferson, but you're still starting Jefferson because he had a great game, 29 fantasy points against the Patriots, who are great against receivers. So you're definitely starting Jefferson. Thielen, I know he had the game-winning touchdown last week, but I'd be hesitant to throw him in my lineup this week. I'd rather a guy like Garrett Wilson. 2 touchdowns last week with Mike White. And Mike White, possible streaming option for quarterback. Michael Carter is doubtful, so Zonovan Knight is my favorite running back for the Jets. I would slot him in. He's starting in one of my 14-man leagues. I'm starting him as my RB2, and I'm starting him over I forget who it is, but I'm starting him over JaMycal Hasty because ETN looks like he's back. So Zonovan Knight, another good option there. Chiefs-Bengals, another game where both teams are probably going to have to throw the ball. Mixon hasn't cleared concussion protocol yet, but we expect him to before the game tomorrow. Chase has been limited in practice all week, and we expect him to return as well. But of course, check tomorrow morning before the games to make sure those guys are playing. If they are, then I would probably get them into your lineup because it's tough to sit them in such a good matchup and such a high-scoring game. I mean, Chiefs-Bengals, it's going to be 20 points at least for each team here. And Kelsey, Mahomes, I mean, even Isaiah Pacheco, if McKinnon ends up sitting. I know McKinnon had better practice on Friday, but if he doesn't play, Pacheco is a great option there. Juju, you might want to try to get him into your lineup as well, because I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. If Mahomes is going to have to throw it, it's going to be to Kelsey. It might be to Marquez Valdes-Scantling, but Juju hopefully will be more integrated into this offense after that concussion and that illness. He practiced full this week, so I like Juju as well. And then the last game I love is the Chargers-Raiders. Obviously, if you have Jacobs, don't worry. He didn't practice much throughout the week, but he's going to play, and he's going to have a good game, so definitely start Jacobs, start Devontae Adams. Those are the only players you're really starting for the Vegas Raiders. And then for the Chargers, Mike Williams is out, so Keenan Allen you're starting, Herbert you're starting, and Eckler you're starting. Josh Palmer, possible flex option. I don't like him as much this week because you don't really know who the Chargers are going to go to. Everett caught that 2-point conversion to win the game, but DeAndre Carter was actually the wide receiver that finished with the most fantasy points on that that team last week. So Palmer seems to be taking a back seat. So I would probably fade Palmer, but Keenan Allen, Eckler, Herbert, you're getting into your lineup. So those are the 4 games that I love this week. If you have guys in those games, look for those games to be high scoring and upgrade them on all your fantasy teams. And the 3 games that I hate, that if I had players on these fantasy teams or on these teams, I would probably fade them on my fantasy teams and probably try not to get them into your lineup. Obviously, it depends who you're deciding between, but downgrade all these players that are in these games. The first game is the Broncos versus Ravens. That's probably going to be low scoring. I mean, the Ravens have a good run defense, so do the Broncos. I think this is going to be tough. I mean, if you have Lamar, you're probably still starting him. If you have Mark Andrews, you're definitely starting him. But other than that, I don't really love anybody in this game, so I'd fade everybody else. Commanders versus Giants. I know my Giants, I think they're going to win this game, but I do think it's going to be low scoring. I think if you have Saquon, you're definitely starting him. Other than that, probably you might start Terry as a flex, but other than that, Brian Robinson, I know, had his best game of the season last week, but I probably wouldn't start him. I mean, I would fade a lot of players in that game. Saquon's the only guy that's a must start there. And then the last game is Saints-Bucks. That's Monday Night Football. I mean, Brady and Evans were one of my weekly sits, 2 of my weekly sits way back early in the season when these 2 teams played, and they might be again. I mean, come tomorrow, I usually don't pick players on my weekly sit list that play Sunday night or Monday, but it might be too good. If Marshawn Lattimore returns, he's going to be on Evans, and every time they match up, they basically fight and get suspended or thrown out of the game, and Evans doesn't even do anything for fantasy. So Evans, I would try not to get into my lineup, even if Lattimore doesn't play, and Brady, the same thing. I think that's going to be low scoring. I know the Bucs are at home, but they're probably going to run the ball. Saints are probably going to play good defense. They always match up well against the Bucs. So if I had any players in those 3 games, really the only guys that are must starts in my opinion in those 3 games are Mark Andrews and Saquon Barkley. And hopefully you guys win your matchups this week, but definitely stay tuned for my live show tomorrow for my weekly picks, weekly sits, and join the Patreon if you're looking to make those good lineup decisions before the fantasy playoffs so that you could win, get into your fantasy playoffs, and then win your fantasy football championship. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys tomorrow morning.